What's going on, people in YouTube land? I'm Dave Richard from the Fantasy Football Today podcast, brought to you by CBS Sports. And on today's show, we get into the losing teams from the divisional round of the playoffs. What's the fantasy impact from what we saw? And where are we going to draft these guys? From Dalvin Cook to Adam Thielen to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and of course, Lamar Jackson. What to make of this game that he had against Tennessee, and where should he get drafted? Are you going to use what happened in that game against Tennessee and hold it against him on draft day, or should you ignore it and look at him as a top 5 fantasy player? We're going to get into all of it right here on Fantasy Football Today. And then there were four teams remaining with Super Bowl aspirations, and 4 teams ready to go under our microscope, dissecting them for Fantasy Football 2020. One word to describe the weekend that was: Ben Schrager.
Henry.
That's a good word. That makes sense. Jamie?
I guess I'll just say Mahomes.
That also is a good word. Crazy. Crazy is the word that I would use. I thought it was a crazy weekend. Lots of crazy stuff going on, but an enjoyable one. There was only one dud game, in my opinion. There were dud moments in some of the other games, but I enjoyed it all. Anyway, welcome to Fantasy Football Today. It's Dave, it's Jamie, it's Ben Schrager. We're going to get into everything that happened in the week and what it means for fantasy in 2020. But first, a player who impressed you during the divisional round of the playoffs. Ben.
It was Travis Kelce. I mean, the guy played the least amount of snaps all year because he got hurt, hamstring injury, 10 catches, 3 touchdowns, dominated the game, led the comeback with Patrick Mahomes. Kelce impressed me, and he's going to probably make a push towards the end of the first round of 2020 drafts. I really don't see why not.
Which is where he
was a big fan.
Yeah.
He was there for me in 2019. Like, I didn't mind taking him toward the end of round 1. I know a lot of people ended up taking him round 2. That's probably going to be where Kelce, I think he could end up being an early round 2 pick, because I think people could look for like a stud receiver or the best running back.
It just depends, like when you get to that 8 to 10 spot, and you see what's going to be available to you in round 2, and if you want to just sort of get ahead of it without having somebody 13 through 16 taking the player that you want. So if there's a receiver that you think is going to be there in round 2, if there's one of those backs that you like, that's that group of Aaron Jones and I'm trying to think of the other guy.
The Nick Chubbs of the world.
Yeah, well, Nick Chubb's probably going to be a first round pick, but I think Mixon, Fournette, those group of guys that are going to be somewhere between in that 15 range. If you like those guys, you say, okay, I'll take Kelce back end of round 1 and be happy with it. So. A lot of people like Kittle still better than Kelce, though. So that's going to be interesting, dilemma I think that we go through as Kelce gets a year older. But it's hard to get away from what he does for Andy Reid and what he does for Patrick Mahomes.
Obviously, he was the highest scoring non-quarterback in the divisional round of the playoffs. That's in non-PPR leagues, and he was a monster in DFS. If you had him, you pretty much punched your ticket to at least some type of a cash. Jamie, who impressed you?
I mean, Davante Adams was my favorite receiver coming into the year, and obviously the start was bad with the slow production and the toe injury. But if they don't add a receiver, he'll be number 2 for me behind Michael Thomas. DeAndre Hopkins is a stud, and he had another strong game in the losing effort for the Texans. But you see what what Adams means to this Packers offense. It's almost like what we thought of Hopkins without Will Fuller. I think so. There's Adam talks about this a lot. Adam Mazer talks about this a lot of how much when Will Fuller plays, it takes away from what Hopkins does. If they don't add anybody of significance, I mean, you just see how much Rodgers is locked in on what Adams does for this team, on what he's capable of doing for this team. I know we had a debate earlier in the season about Keenan Allen and Davante Adams, who's the better receiver. There was actually I think it was Omar Ruiz of the NFL Network said that some of the Seahawks defenders said that they compared him to Keenan Allen, who is a very excellent player, obviously, and does a lot of big things, but he doesn't have, I think, the same ceiling like Davante Adams does. And so, not to make it a Keenan Allen Davante Adams comparison, but I think you just see what Adams' ceiling can be on a high end, and it's not a lot of competition for targets in that offense.
8 catches, 160 yards, 2 touchdowns, just a monster game. The best wide receiver of the week for sure. And yes, DFS lineups with Adams and Kelce probably got you more than the min cash in the past week. I think Adams' quarterback was one of the most impressive players, and I was thrilled to see Aaron Rodgers go out there and play like I remembered Aaron Rodgers as before, because there were times this year where Aaron Rodgers just did not look as good as we remembered. Certainly we drafted him as a top 3 quarterback. He didn't finish as a top 3 quarterback, but he had himself I thought he had a great game against Seattle. It ended up being a pretty easy matchup for him, and then Adams was the guy that he connected with. Loved the play at the end of the game to basically ice it with the rainbow lob to the sideline with Adams. I also thought that the play calling was really good for Green Bay in the game.
Well, it's been kind of the same for them all season long. Great start. They kind of struggle in the second
middle,
and
then they come through at the end.
And then, like Rodgers said in the post-game interview, we started strong, we finished strong. And the thing with Rodgers is that I don't think statistically in this offense, if this thing stays the same and if they win a Super Bowl, I would change it. He's going to have to carry the team because the defense is great. The run game is strong. And not that he's a game manager by any stretch, because he could still make every throw that you need him to make. But he just doesn't have the same ceiling that we're used to seeing from him. And so, when we went through our top 10 quarterbacks, he was on, I think, 3 of the 5 lists as the 8 to 10 guy. And, it's funny because Heath brought up the point of Ryan Tannehill versus Rodgers. This was at peak Tannehill, when we were talking about this, of his stats. I still think most people will take Rodgers over Tannehill, but, the fact that he's in that conversation now is kind of speaks volumes to where Rodgers is statistically. He could still throw it as well as anybody in the league. If they asked him to throw the ball 35 plus times on a consistent basis, he'd probably be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. I just don't think that's what this offense caters to.
Do you think he throws 35 times against San Francisco?
He's probably going to have to.
I think so too. So the numbers that he had, 16 of 27, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 14 yards.
But see, that's not a great fantasy day. That's a good fantasy day. It's not a great fantasy day.
I agree. But I think he can be better than that next week. He might have some turnovers along the way, and I think he'll have a chance to impress again. So while he wasn't even close, he wasn't even a top 4 fantasy quarterback this past week. Russell Wilson had more fantasy points than he did. I still was impressed with how he did. Honorable mention to Marquise Brown, by the way. I thought Brown, that one-handed catch that he had late in the game where Lamar's throwing into triple coverage, it's a total YOLO ball. He came up with it. I'm excited to draft him in 2020. So if one of you had taken Rodgers, I would have said Marquise Brown. All right, a player who did not impress you, did not come through, did not meet your expectations. Would you like to go first, Jamie Eisenberg?
Lamar Jackson was a letdown. Not that he is at fault completely for what this loss was for Baltimore, but this is just what the flaw in the system is when he has to throw the ball 50 times. That's not what the Ravens want to do. It's not his strength. And the turnovers were something that we're not used to seeing from him. The fumble in their own territory, the interceptions.
Constant pressure, too.
Yeah, again, it's not on him, but, you expected him to be great. And this is now 2 straight playoff games where he's looked mediocre. And so that's the thing that he's going to have to overcome. It's going to be the unfortunate storyline for the Ravens all of 2020 is, can he win a playoff game? I hope that's the motivation that he needs to have another MVP season, because that would be great for us. But it was just it was a little shocking to see against that Titans defense that he played as poorly as he did. And kudos to Tennessee and Dean Pease and what they did, and sort of making things frustrating for him.
How much of that do you think came down to not having his Mark Ingram really healthy, Mark Andrews really healthy? Those are guys he relied on all year long.
They took another game plan. It was great. I didn't think Mark Ingram was going to play healthy to begin with. The fact that he was still limited in practice all week long. We had the show last week where I kept saying Gus Edwards. I thought that should have been the lead rusher for them. He had another game with his rushing average was over 5. So he probably could have done a little bit better job if they gave him more work, and maybe Justice Hills as well. But you're right. Not having Ingram at 100%, not having Mark Andrews at 100%. And that it's not his fault that the defense couldn't tackle Derrick Henry. So, his performance is not the reason why the Ravens lost, but you're just used to seeing him do some different things. Statistically, he was a star. Obviously, when you look at his rushing and what he did, but this is the next evolution of Lamar Jackson. Is they need to get him another maybe 1 or 2 outside weapons like Marquise Brown, like you said, Dave, was great, but.
I don't know if Willie Snead or Seth Roberts are going to be the answers.
Right. Those guys aren't stars, and Marquise Brown's not polished. And so there's a lot more left to see what this offense can bring, and we'll see if, they have to replace 2 key offensive linemen if, Yanda and Saffold aren't brought back because of either retirement. Yanda's talked about that before. We'll see about Saffold, what his, long-term plans are, or, I guess short-term plans at this point. But, that's the next step for him is becoming a better passer. And it's not that he's a bad passer by any stretch, but he's got to be able to do Mahomes. When you're down multiple scores, bring your team back and finish. The drive at the end of the first half. They score a touchdown there. It's probably a different ballgame going in the second.
How often were the Ravens down by 2 scores this year?
It didn't happen.
Exactly, because they were on top of teams early, and then they were able to just coast to victories, and they couldn't do that in this game.
It was a dream season for Baltimore. Just nightmare ending.
Absolutely. And like you said, Jamie, you can't put this on Lamar Jackson.
No.
He's still going to be a great fantasy quarterback. And I couldn't stand the reaction of people on Twitter saying, well, I told you so. Like, are you kidding? He just had an MVP type season, and he had a great game statistically here.
He had a great fantasy game. He didn't have a great game.
Obviously, right. Well, that's what I'm talking about. If he had a great game, they probably would have won, but that didn't happen. I still think he's got a lot of room to grow. I think if there's one thing that I'm nervous about, it's that Tennessee laid out a blueprint for how to try and slow him down, try and get him going sideways.
Sure, but so did people thought the Chargers did too in the playoffs last year.
But I don't know how many teams tried to do what the Chargers did with loading up on defensive backs.
I would think that there was probably some of that at some point during the season. I don't remember exactly going back through every game, but you don't see that take him away the way that they did.
Sure,
try and emulate it in some way, shape, or form, but. You have to have a pass rush and the defensive backs to sort of play the way they did. And really by the Chargers, it was by design not by design. It was, they had to do it because their linebackers were so beat up.
And it just happened to work out very well for them that it did. I almost want to throw out that game against the Chargers for Lamar because it was his first year. He really got thrown into it late in the year because the Ravens weren't doing so well. This one is a little bit more of one that he can learn from and one that we can learn from too. Lamar Jackson, number 1 fantasy quarterback for anybody in this room?
100%.
Yes.
Number 1 overall, I'm saying. When draft day comes, he's at the top of your quarterback rankings.
Yes.
Okay. He is. I don't know that I'm going to take him because I think his price point's going to be too high.
It's going to be too high.
But he is my number 1.
He's going to be a top 5 overall pick based on average draft position. I think that's an easy. Mahomes was 7.
Yep.
So when you look at Jackson and the rushing, and everybody's going to fall in love with it, and the off-season storylines will be, I'm motivated to overcome this, and, I want to repeat as MVP.
And when they add that weapon, oh, my goodness.
Yeah, they'll bring in somebody, whether it's a rookie, whether, if they keep the offensive line for the most part intact. I don't know what their plans are for Ingram. He's going to be 31. It's December when he's 31, but he'll be 30, to open the season. So what they do there is going to be key. What they do to add to Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews is going to be key. But, I mean, you don't get 3,000, 1,000 from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first time in NFL history, so that's hard to overlook.
I've got him number 2. I've got Patrick Mahomes number 1, but I totally get why you would have Lamar Jackson number 1. Quickly, Ben, player who did not impress you.
George Kittle, big disappointment. He had 7 of 8 games, 15-plus PPR points over the last 8. And what does he do? 3 for 16. And
they tried to get him in the end zone. They tried.
They did.
Yeah.
They just didn't throw very much. And to be honest, not throwing a lot didn't really affect him during the season. In games where Garoppolo didn't throw a lot, he still put up monster performances. It was just a letdown, and unfortunately, the Niners did really well. So it's kind of like, oh man, does Kittle really have to be that involved? But don't take this as any sort of indication of his value.
No.
He's still going to be super valuable next year.
Absolutely. The Niners defense really was the superstar of that game. They were all over Kirk Cousins. It felt like every time there was a third down, they were sacking him. And it was just a brutal second half, especially for Minnesota. And it just made it easy for San Francisco to just run down the throats of Minnesota, which they did after one of the turnovers. I'm sure Kittle will have a chance to bounce back against Green Bay on Sunday. Mine was Duke Johnson, just because he had some opportunities, especially, whoa, Houston up 24. You think it's going to be an easy type of game where they can just run it, and then all of a sudden, like magically almost, the Chiefs had 28 points. That game was crazy. I can't wait to talk about that. But Duke Johnson had some opportunities. He didn't come through with it. Not an exciting player to talk about. Not somebody you're going to be interested in spending major draft capital on in 2020. Anyway, that's how we'll start this podcast. And we've got 3 episodes of this podcast a week during the offseason. We've never done this before. We're doing it now. We are going to come to you with podcasts from the Super Bowl. We've got a podcast later this week with Cortland Sutton. Did a quick Q&A with him while he was in the office. And we'll have our rotating band of fantasy football lovers joining you, helping you try and win your league. We'll get into specific talks about the new coaches throughout the offseason. Mike McCarthy with Dallas. What does that mean for Dak Prescott? Kevin Stefanski going to Cleveland. What does that mean for Baker Mayfield and company? A lot to talk about, and it's going to happen all offseason long to get you ready for your fantasy drafts. We've heard it from our listeners before. Those who participate in the podcast, they download and subscribe it all offseason long. They do better in their fantasy leagues when it gets really hot in August and September because they're prepared. So we're doing what we can to help prepare you for your fantasy drafts 6-7 months from right now. We also have a newsletter. You can read what we have to say. Ben, what's going on with the newsletter?
So the newsletter is going to be the same schedule as the podcast, 3 times a week. You sign up, cbssports.com/newsletter. We're going to have daily fantasy content all off season long. Not only the articles that you guys are writing, talk about our podcasts on there, prospect profiles, rankings. Heath has dynasty rankings coming out. We'll send them right to your inbox. So go to cbssports.com/newsletter. We'll keep you updated. You get the newsletter, you get the podcast, you tune into HQ a little bit. You'll be so prepared for your drafts come August.
You won't be that guy that shows up 5 minutes late to your draft with a magazine he picked up at a gas station that was, got rankings from some schlub somewhere. I don't know. And then they're not prepared. You'll crush it in your leagues. All right, injuries, news, notes. I already talked about the Cleveland one. They're going to hire Kevin Stefanski. He's not expected to retain Todd Monken. It's going to be the West Coast offense in Cleveland. It should be pretty, I don't know. I would think that it would be okay for Baker Mayfield. I just feel like they need to address their offensive line.
Baker's got to learn to throw on the run. I mean, that's what a Stefanski offense is going to look like. It's going to be a lot of boots, a lot of play action. It's great for Nick Chubb. Biggest thing they got to do is fix the offensive line. I mean, if they can solve that problem, that was their biggest flaw this year, because their skill players were great. And, now Stefanski had a great wide receiver duo of Diggs and Thielen to work with. He's got another great one to work with in Beckham and Landry, and hopefully gets on the same page with David Njoku. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case with Freddie Kitchens. So, that should be a bounce back season for the Browns if they can sort of check their egos at the door, which was a big problem. So we'll see.
What do we think of the pass volume in this offense?
If they have their way, not much.
Right.
So
it'll be Nick Chubb.
Right.
Nick
Which is
Chubb
awesome.
will lead the way. Yeah, that'd be great. He'll be worth that first round pick.
If they don't retain Kareem Hunt, as well, because that was a little bit of a downturn for Chubb, as we saw.
Sure. Didn't get much work in the passing game, and that definitely helped Kareem Hunt out down the stretch. Denver makes a change at offensive coordinator. They get rid of Rich Scangarello. They bring in Pat Shurmur. So they're just adding a lot of experience. It's the same type of offense. That's also going to be a West Coast system. I think it's a good move for Denver. I think that you've got somebody who's been playing or calling plays for several years, and certainly last couple of years with the Giants. He'll be able to come into Denver, work with Drew Lock. I think it's a good receiving core. I'm excited with what this could mean for Noah Fant because we've seen Pat Shurmur put up some really good numbers with his tight ends. Evan Ingram would have been that guy again this year if he hadn't have gotten hurt. He did have some good games before.
The combo of Ingram and Caden Smith was very good. So Ingram was top 6 in points per game. Obviously only played the 8 games, so he was 13.1 PPR points per game. And then Caden Smith, as we saw, when Daniel Jones, didn't work out so much the 2 starts that Eli Manning made, but with Daniel Jones, those numbers were good. The one thing you look at with Shurmur is, he was the tight ends coach in Minnesota before getting the, offense coordinator job there, and that was Kyle Rudolph's big season was when he was the play caller.
What do you think it means for the run game? Think it keeps going with a lot of Lindsey and Freeman, or do you think one guy can potentially take over there and be the lead?
Well, LaShawn McCoy had 2 seasons with 300-plus carries. Steven Jackson had 2 seasons with 300-plus carries under Shurmur. I think there's a chance that Lindsey gets fed, but Royce Freeman and Lindsey had pretty similar outputs last year. So I think it's probably going to be a split, but Lindsey is the more impressive runner. I just am very curious about how the red zone touches will be split. Lindsey dominated early on this season. Then it became more of a split. So I think it helps Lindsey a little bit, but I don't really know.
It's not going to make you want to rush up and draft Philip Lindsay with a top.
He's not a bell cow just because of the move. No.
We'll see. John Elway, does want to pay Lindsey.
Right.
So what they do in that regard could sort of speak volumes if they're going to sort of say, okay, you're our guy, and then Freeman play out your rookie deal and you're done. You know what I mean? They've talked up Freeman enough that the play has not matched the conversation. So they don't really seem to be as enamored with Royce Freeman as they talk about.
No, but they might need a second bag, and who knows what the draft will bring in Denver.
Oh, they won't add anybody else that way.
I hope not.
I think Freeman's a capable backup. Thankfully we haven't seen Lindsey miss any time. And look, when Lindsey's gotten feature work, when Freeman's gotten feature work, he's been pretty good. Philadelphia
fired their offensive coordinator Mike Groh and quarterback coach Carson Walch. Walsh. We'll go with Walsh. Mike Mularkey is retiring. He was last the tight ends coach for the Atlanta Falcons. Drew Brees has been contacted about broadcasting opportunities, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. I'd rather see Drew Brees play football than talk about football. That's just me.
He could talk about football in 4 years.
Michael Thomas played through a broken hand against the Minnesota Vikings.
I guess the splint on his hand was more than
Julian Edelman had partially torn rib cartilage. That came out the same day that he also got arrested. That's fun stuff. Good job for Julian Edelman. He's just banging up his body and banging up Mercedes-Benzes, I guess. And according to NFL research, Ryan Tannehill joins Hall of Fame quarterback Terry Bradshaw as the only players in the Super Bowl era to win consecutive playoff games with one or more touchdown passes and fewer than 100 yards passing. Bradshaw did it in 1974 in the AFC Championship game and in Super Bowl IX. Great company for Ryan Tannehill. We were just talking before the show about how much the Titans should pay him. And I think it makes sense to give him the franchise tag and then see what happens in 2020.
It does. And then when do we draft him knowing that they can succeed with him not throwing a lot and the volume really not being there?
He's a late round pick.
Yeah, he's going to be, top 15-ish would be my guess, depending on how the rookies shake out and where some of the other free agents go. Because, if Drew Brees is out of the way, for example, or Tom Brady goes to a different team, that'll change, sort of how the rankings could go. Rivers retires or plays for a different team. But I think you look at what Tannehill did pre-playoffs, it's hard to overlook that. The defense was not good for Tennessee. They played much better in the postseason. And Henry's doing things that, no running back has done. So, there's still a lot to like. And that's another team that can add another piece to their passing game, too.
I think it'll come down to schedule. If Ryan Tannehill's early season schedule, weeks 1, 2, 3, look good, people will draft him to start as their streaming quarterback. Otherwise, if it's a tough schedule to begin the year, I bet no one drafts him.
Well, the draft we did last week, the non-PPR draft, I was the last one to take a quarterback, and I think there were already some backups off the board at that time. So I took him round 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fine with that. And I took Baker as a second quarterback, so I'll take my chances.
And
that type of duo.
Right, sure. Theoretically, you'd stream with both those guys to begin the year. All right, let's talk about the players on the teams that were eliminated in the divisional round. We'll talk about where we will rank them in 2020. Let's start with the Ravens because they've got a lot of firepower. They've got a lot of great players, and we know Lamar Jackson will be the first quarterback taken off the board.
They really just have 4.
Who are the 4?
It's the quarterback, the running back, the wide receiver, and the tight end.
Probably so.
I don't think anybody's drafting anybody else.
Well, the defense, people are going to draft the Ravens defense.
And the kicker.
So that's 5. And Justin Tucker, too.
I think unless, in the 2 drafts that we did, I took Gus Edwards in both. I think he's one of those handcuffs that you cover. He's a lottery ticket because I think Ingram, calf injury, now 30. If they're going to continue to lean on him, it could be a problem.
What has Gus Edwards done to lose confidence in the coaching staff? Nothing. So I think he's going to be involved in what they do, and I think his workload could rise, and it could hurt Mark Ingram. So I wouldn't be as excited to draft Mark Ingram this year as I was last year, and we were looking at Mark Ingram around 4-ish. I think that's probably going to be where he ends up going in 2020 as well.
I'm going to guess he goes a little bit lower just because.
Really?
Yeah, it's the bad taste in your mouth of what you saw, not the just the playoff performance at the end of the season, just not being there, getting hurt in week 16, not playing week 17. So, you're going to hear a lot about his age, and you're going to hear a lot in the fantasy community. Justice Hill, because that's a guy that people like.
And I think the playoff performance from Justice Hill is going to have people talking even more about him. He's on the field for pretty much all the passing snaps in this playoff game, and I think the offseason hype with Justice Hill will be pretty real. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much that'll translate, but it'll definitely hurt his draft stock.
Mark Ingram.
Yeah. Ingram went toward the end of round 3 in our first non-PPR mock, and I think that's a little bit too soon, but this is also a mock with 0 rookies. We don't know what the free agency impact is going to bring to other running backs. I think it's fine for what we are doing to provide content.
But I think some other guys around him.
Who are some other guys around him? At running back or just in general?
Running back.
Kenyon Drake went at 2 picks behind him. Devin Singletary went 3 picks behind him.
Both guys.
Of course I would take Devin Singletary.
Absolutely.
I'm probably going to end up taking Kenyon Drake out of him too. It depends on where David Johnson is and what that situation. How about Philip Lindsay?
Where David Johnson is. I'm more concerned about Kenyon Drake. If Drake is in Arizona, I'll take him over him.
Philip Lindsay or Mark Ingram?
Right now, Lindsay.
I'll take Ingram.
I think I'm going to take Lindsay over Ingram just because I expect Ingram to share a little bit more in 2020. Mark Andrews, where you feel like he's going to go, is he a top 6 fantasy tight end?
He's 4 for me.
Okay. I have him at 4 as well. It's going to be tough because do you take him in the 4th round and lock up your tight end there? Or do you wait and get a tight end late and let someone else kind of reach on an Andrews? Because we've seen Andrews do really well, but we know he doesn't play a lot of snaps. He doesn't have a lot of targets. He was very efficient, a lot of touchdowns this year. How much does he regress next year?
It'll come down to, if he stays at 4 for me, what they do with their receiving core. He finished 2 targets shy of 100. He would have been in that rare 100-target club at the tight end position. The touchdowns are the biggest thing because he was second in the position in touchdowns. And is that sustainable? So if people are going to, and I'm sure Keith will probably be the one driving the train, the touchdown regression from a passing standpoint for Lamar Jackson, he's the one most likely to lose because if Marquise Brown takes the next step, and again, if whoever they add,
sure,
will help in that regard. But I also think that you see a little bit more from him. He would have been over 100 targets. He had, a knee injury in the middle of the season and barely played Week 17. I think he barely played Week 17. I don't remember if he was one of the guys that wasn't active. But, you get 100 targets in this offense with what he should be. He's Kittle, he's Kelce. I don't think Marquise Brown is going to overtake him as the target leader, as the guy that's the go-to option in Greg Roman's offense. So I still like what Mark Andrews brings. But, you can debate Darren Waller. You can debate Hunter Henry. You can, throw Evan Ingram up there if you want to.
How about Austin Hooper?
Austin Hooper's another one. Yeah, so that was the when I wrote the top 10 tight ends, that was the spot where everybody differed. We all had the same top 3, 5 of us, every single one of Kelce, Kittle, and Ertz, and then it was a different number 4. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty interesting to see that.
I think of him more as a short area target and red zone threat for the Ravens.
You would think that, but
think he is?
Absolutely.
He had more deep ball routes than any other tight end, which is pretty crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know what? I remember thinking, just off the top of my head, doing my research on Lamar Jackson this time last year, Andrews was the only guy he could connect with on those deeper routes. So I'm taking back what I said. Obviously, he's good at that role as well. But I feel like that Marquise Brown could be the deep shot guy, which we've seen from him before. Yeah, if they add another weapon, I think that's going to hurt Mark Andrews. He went 52nd overall in our non-PPR mock. Too soon? Too late?
That's a steal.
Steal.
I think it's about right. I think it's about right for him. Okay. Lamar Jackson, we already talked about him. Pretty much going to be a first-round pick no matter what we say. Perfect world, Lamar Jackson would be your second-round pick. You'd take him in round 2?
The turn.
If he's there?
Late round 2. I really don't even want to take him in round 2. There's too much talent, I think, that'll be there. I got Josh Jacobs at the end of late round 2 in our PPR mock. Mm-hmm. I would much rather have Josh Jacobs than Lamar Jackson.
It's the same thing we see time and time again. Mahomes, he missed time with injury. He wasn't having the same statistical, outburst that we saw in his MVP season. There's going to be something with Lamar Jackson that drops his stats down, whether it's 5 touchdowns, whether it's 100 rushing yards, whether it's 400 rushing yards. One thing we talked about during the season, like Pete Prisco, for example, says he expects 3,500 passing yards and about 800 rushing yards. So that clearly hurts his fantasy production. It makes him a better player, potentially. But the stat change, however it comes about, he's not going to probably be 1,200 rushing yards again. It's just not realistic to expect that. He could, which would be great, but 43 total touchdowns. Let's say that's 35, and Dave, you have Mahomes ahead of him. He could return to being a 50 touchdown quarterback. But the biggest thing is that Mahomes was just around the number 10 quarterback in 2018. Jackson was the number 14 quarterback off the board in 2019. So who's going to be the guy this year? Is it Kyler? Is it Josh Allen? The 2 guys that finished behind him in rushing production. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be, somebody else that takes that next leap that may not be the best quarterback in fantasy, but could be top 5?
Well, you saw 3 of the top quarterbacks this year were late round picks.
Jameis was the number 13 quarterback off the board. He was 14.
Yep.
So those 2 in particular, the ones that stood out to me. And so he could still be top 5. He could still have a great season. He could be top 3. He could be 2. But where you're taking him in round 1, again, most likely, to where the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th guy comes off the board, or the 13th, 14th guy comes off the board. That's how you sort of build your team. It's why Lamar Jackson was so good for fantasy this year, is because you're able to get him mid to late round pick.
Yeah, and I feel like the investment that you're going to have to make in him, he's going to have to come close to what he did last year. I don't know if he can get 36 passing touchdowns, but I think the 7 rushing touchdowns is
That could go up.
I think that could go up. To me, it's a close call between him and Mahomes. I think Mahomes is better than the stats that he put up in 2019, and so that's why I think Patrick Mahomes is like.
But how
a
early
safer
would you take
quarterback
Mahomes?
pick, like round 3.
Right.
So, I'm in the same boat as you guys. I just look at the quarterbacks just a little bit different.
The thing with Mahomes is, I mean, again, he played through the high ankle sprain, lost the time with the knee injury, lost Tyreek Hill for 4 games.
Yeah, right.
So there were things that, and this could happen to Lamar Jackson. He could lose Mark Andrews for 5-6 games. He could lose Marquise Brown for 2 or 3 games. He may not get another piece. He may lose Yonda and Saffold, and offensive line could be an issue. I don't know about their free agents and whatnot. So they could lose something there, as we saw it hurt Jared Goff, for example, who was a great fantasy quarterback the year before. So there are things that we still have to work through to sort of determine how good Lamar Jackson could be, or how far he could fall, how much he could fail. And same thing with Mahomes. I mean, there's Sammy Watkins could be replaced by somebody better. We could see, Travis Kelce have a fall off as he goes, from 31 to 32.
Tyreek Hill could be healthy the whole year.
How about a run game?
All year, or maybe this is the Tyreek Hill that we're getting, where we're not getting the consistent performance like we saw, which made Mahomes as good as he was in 2018. There are things that you work through with these quarterbacks, and it comes down to the investment you make in these guys, and that sort of swings your fantasy team. There are a lot of people that missed the playoffs because Mahomes was bad from the standpoint of where he was a year ago because you took him so high. And
if Kansas City adds a run game, all of a sudden maybe he's not throwing quite as much, and that could be something that
I don't know. As long as Andy Reid's still the coach, he's throwing quite as much.
He'll throw quite a bit. Real quick, Marquise Brown, what round would you feel comfortable taking him in?
7, 8.
Yeah.
8, 9.
I got him in late round 8. I was thrilled in the non-PPR that we did. All right, so let's move on from Baltimore to Minnesota. We'll keep it purple. Dalvin Cook, top 3 pick. Seems pretty simple, cut and dried.
5 for me, but yeah.
Yeah, he's my number 3.
Are you worried about Alexander Mattison having a larger role, similarly to what we were saying about Gus Edwards cutting in to Mark Ingram?
Maybe, but if they promote Kubiak, which makes the most sense, just make him the official offensive coordinator.
I don't mind Madison.
If that
getting
happens,
5
I'll
touches.
be very happy.
Yeah,
Say that again, Ben?
I wouldn't mind Madison getting 5-6 touches, give Dalvin a little bit of rest. If Dalvin gets 15 to 20 touches, he's going to be a top 5 running back.
Here are some stats provided by Adam Azer, who has a sick cat. That's why he's not here today. First 7 games, Dalvin Cook was the number 2 fantasy running back in both formats. He averaged 5.5 yards per carry, 9.2 yards per catch. His last 7 games, 9th in non-PPR, 5th in PPR. He averaged 3.5 yards per carry and 10.3 yards per catch. He finished the season with 8 straight games, including the postseason, averaging 3.7 yards per carry or less.
The only thing with him is the injuries. I mean, you see what the upside is. We saw it in his first 4 games of his rookie season. We saw it in spurts in his sophomore season, when he wasn't fighting the hamstring injury. And obviously this year was just a superstar campaign. But once again, wasn't on the field at the end of the season. You just always have to have that concern with him. He's just going to be one of those guys that these injuries just keep racking up for him, and they're different injuries. The torn ACL, hamstring, shoulder injury. So I don't want to say he's injury prone, but it's hard to overlook that he hasn't played 16 games in 3 seasons. And will he give you that in year 4 when you're comparing him to Elliott, who never misses time, barring the suspension, Barkley, who came back early from the high ankle sprain, is really the only injury we've seen from him so far. Younger NFL career by 1 year, but those are the guys you're comparing him to, and so it's a matter of McCaffrey. Does Cook go there? Does Cook go here? Does Cook go there? And then when you're talking PPR, I think Michael Thomas is the second best player because, you get 140 plus catches. That's hard to overlook as well. So he's in that mix of, 2 through 5, I think, for most rank lists is what you'll see.
I think so too. All right. Diggs, Thielen. When do you pull the trigger on these guys? And who do you feel better about between the two?
Thielen.
I feel better about Thielen.
Same. Yeah, I'm with you. But I don't know if I'm going to be as excited to take him around 45th overall.
He'll be gone before then.
You think so?
PPR for sure.
In PPR, I'd take him in the 3rd round. Late 3rd, but I would take him in the 3rd.
I don't think that's necessarily indication of he should go there. I'm just saying.
Right. Okay. And I'm, G. Willikers. I can't believe that he's going to go that high again.
I don't know what Ben Gretsch will finish with when we get to our rankings by August, but in the top 10 he had Diggs at 10. And so that was the one that stood out to me the most of the 50 players that I looked at the receiver spot was Diggs in the top 10 for anybody. This was his best game on the road. He didn't play well on the road at all this year, Diggs, and so it seems to be a byproduct of healthy Thielen, not healthy Thielen, Thielen on the field, Thielen not on the field. And, obviously Thielen was not 100% with the
since
bloody
Thielen's
sock.
return, Diggs less than 5 targets a game.
Yeah, and, if it's Kubiak, you got to assume things will be the same. If they bring in another offensive coordinator to replace Stefanski, will that be a different system that, they put Kirk Cousins and these receivers through? Clearly the defense is fading. It's not the same group that we've been accustomed to the last couple of years. Not that they were awful, but, put them in some spots where there was some bad secondary play, and that could continue to snowball, and then we see maybe some more back and forth type of games for the Vikings. But I think it's Dalvin Cook is clearly the catalyst of this offense, and then it's very hard for these two guys to both be great week in, week out, and so it's just a matter of who do you like better. I think most people will probably still take Thielen over Diggs.
Thielen in our non-PPR mock went 35th overall, so late round 3.
And that's non-PPR.
Yeah, and then Diggs, where do you think he went?
Probably either in the same range or a little bit higher.
46th overall. Azer pulled the trigger on Stephon Diggs late round 4.
And we did this draft following the wild card round when Thielen had the monster game.
Mm-hmm. I think that this can be a team that throws a little bit more, like you guys said. I wonder if the change in coordinators on both sides of the ball impacts what Minnesota does. And Kirk Cousins, I don't know if he's going to be as good as he was this past year. So I'm kind of worried all the way around.
You do have really interesting things pulling at each other here because Zimmer and Cousins are entering contract years. So you have Zimmer, who we know what he wants to be. He wants to run, play defense, be conservative, and try and keep the clock on his side. And then you have Cousins, who's probably going to want to have a Dak Prescott type of year of put on a big statistical performance and show that he can still get another big contract, if not stay in Minnesota on another deal. So how those things play out, clearly Zimmer is going to be the one pulling the strings, but we'll see how that impacts Cousins and those receivers. So I think both receivers are we have enough of a sample size with Cousins to know what they are, that Thielen has been better statistically, especially when healthy. But Diggs is going to have these splash moments and can still be good for you. I think I'll continue to say what I've said all along about him is that I don't think his stats are ever going to match the type of player that he is. He's probably capable of doing a lot more and may never fulfill that with his prime years in Minnesota with Kirk Cousins.
Which makes me sad. Sad emoji when I think about that. Cousins and Kyle Rudolph, guys that you might take with your third to last pick if you like who they play.
I wouldn't even. I think
a good matchup in week 1. You wouldn't even take them.
I would pick them up right before week 1, but I wouldn't even use a draft pick.
If you're going to pick them up before week 1, then you're just going to hold another player. Just
rather have an upside guy, see what happens during training camp.
Houston, DeAndre Hopkins. First of all, was his season a disappointment or was his season a moderate success? It obviously wasn't a huge success.
It was a disappointment. He wasn't a bust by any means, but it was definitely a disappointment. The wide receiver position was down this year, and Hopkins still top 5, top 10 receiver, depending on format, but it was just a disappointment. He played really well with Fuller off the field, but with Fuller on the field, he kind of scared me. He wasn't that top 3 wide receiver that some people drafted him at this year and some people are going to draft him at next year.
He was in the top 5. You said it, Ben. It was a down year for wide receivers. It's his worst year since his rookie season, non-Brock Osweiler. So if you're looking at it, comparing it to him, it was a down year. If you're comparing it to the position this year, he was fine. Obviously, this is Mahomes. You were expecting him to be the best at his position, and he wasn't. And he was passed by Michael Thomas, who wasn't far behind in terms of draft value, but he was passed by Godwin. In some cases, format matters, but he was passed by Cooper Kupp. So
Julio too in PPR.
Right. Those Thomas and Julio, you're sort of nitpicking there, but you expect him to be better than the breakout guys of Godwin and Kupp. And you expect him to be on par with what he's used to doing. So is there bounce back potential here, or is this kind of who he is if Fuller's healthy? Now Kenny Stills, I think, is still under contract for another year. And the run game hopefully will be better. It was a better year for them running the ball than we've seen in the last couple of years because Carlos Hyde was a little bit more consistent than what Lamar Miller had done. So, with an improving offensive line, hopefully the 2 young kids that they drafted get better and healthy, and you have Tunsil under contract. So does Hopkins still have the same ceiling that we've seen when he was just completely obliterating everybody? And I don't know if that's the case. He's still a great receiver. He still should be a first-round pick. He should still be one of the top 5 guys at his position off the board. He's not going to be drafted out of Thomas. That's clear. And then it comes down to Julio, Adams. If you want to throw the 2 Tampa guys in the conversation, Evans and Godwin, I don't think those guys have gotten to his level yet, but they had great seasons. that's just kind of where it is, I think, with Hopkins. And we're starting to see maybe the slow slide, not a decline by any stretch. But, I mean, again, I still take him in the first round and no hesitation.
In PPR, I think he makes sense. In non-PPR, I don't know if I'm ready to take him in the first round.
You may not, but there's no question he's going to be a first-round pick.
What about Deshaun Watson, who I think is I've got him at number 3 at quarterback.
It was consistent across the board. It was Mahomes, Jackson, Mahomes, and then Watson was 3.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
I feel like he'll be the best bargain of those guys because I don't think he'll go anywhere close to the first round. Lamar will be a first-round pick. Mahomes will be, among
maybe
those
late
three,
round 2, depending on how quarterbacks go in certain leagues.
I don't know if I'm ready to take him in late round 2. That's something I got to wrap my head around. But
But I'm saying like if we're looking ADP wise, Jackson will be a first-round pick. Mahomes will be in the top 15.
I agree.
And then Watson will be somewhere between 20 and 30. Just on the.
I think the only value where we see Watson is going to be in an industry draft where everyone's down on the quarterback position. Everyone's
and you just
trying to
snag him in late round 4, early round 5,
most
something
drafts
like that. But most drafts he's not
early.
going to be there.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think he'll be good. Like I feel like this year was kind of a down year for him. He had some bad games along the way, and he, some monster games as well.
And he also plays a lot better with Fuller too.
Yeah. He needs Will Fuller because that's somebody that can get him some pretty big numbers. And so let's talk about Will Fuller. He was like a round 7 pick back in August.
You know what he is?
Healthy exactly.
At what point do you take the risk on Will Fuller?
If he's healthy going into camp, he's in the Marquise Brown range. Slightly ahead just because you've seen what the ceiling can be. And Marquise Brown, I think, wants to get to where Will Fuller is because there's a similar type of players. Brown should have a higher ceiling because hopefully he becomes the featured guy in his offense, whereas Fuller's never going to be that player. But, the talent is exceptional. It's just it's hamstring, it's knee, it's ankle, it's all these things that just contribute to him not staying on the field, and it's just become increasingly frustrating.
What do you make of his 3 touchdowns this year, all coming in one game? Just more of the
narrative. Could have had another 3 touchdown game against the Chiefs too. So there's just that. That's what he is. He's got the chance to be 1,008, 1,010. He's just that type of player. But that could be over 5 games. It's just that's the problem.
I'm wondering if the clock is hit 0 on him already, and that he's not going to be ever close to getting to that 1,000.
But this will be his 5th year option, right?
5th year coming up.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming they're picked up if they haven't already.
I'm sure they will.
And so he's going to be locked in as there too. The stats for Deshaun Watson bear it out. So, as long as he's on the field, there's always a chance for great performances. He feels very much like a Sammy Watkins, never going to live up to his potential based on when we see greatness. It's amazing, but it's not consistent.
I think I'm ready to take Marquise Brown ahead of him.
Understandable.
I think Marquise Brown has just a little bit more upside. I know that the quarterback, in terms of just pure passing ability, Watson's got it ahead of Lamar Jackson, but I still feel like that Brown, who's got his own injury issues, they are kind of the same player.
Very similar.
When you think about it.
Yeah, you hope that Brown exceeds what Will Fuller is right now.
Like, I'd rather take him in round 8 than Will Fuller in round 8. Sure. Although I wouldn't mind getting both of them and just going with the one who I think is going to play well.
If you take 2 receivers early and then you want to, get a number 3 guy that has upside or 2 number 3 guys that have upside, these are the perfect 2.
Great flex combo.
Yeah,
for sure.
What about some guys that were drafted, receivers that were drafted ahead of them in our non-PPR mock? Christian Kirk, Robbie Anderson, and Marvin Jones. Are you taking any of those 3 ahead of either of those 2?
I would take Kirk ahead of those 2 in PPR.
Yeah, I get that.
I think there's more upside for him catching the ball. But, Robbie Anderson, if he stays with the Jets, that's the same player. It's
he might be the same player if he goes to the Jets, the Eagles, the Dolphins.
Sure.
It almost might not matter.
But, these are the type of guys that just have not been consistent 70-plus catch guys. They haven't been consistent staying on the field. They haven't been consistent in their production week in, week out. It's funny. It feels like we're doing Marvin Jones a disservice because he was better than all of them this year.
Yeah, it's true. Carlos Hyde, Duke Johnson, I assume that one or both could get replaced.
Lamar Miller.
Lamar Miller will probably go right back to the Hyde role is my guess.
If he's ready to go.
That's a spot they just need to upgrade.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. They and I also think they're still going to need to address their offensive line. It's not as big of a concern as it was this time last year. Yeah,
probably through free agency.
They're a team that seems to be kind of in trouble. their defense might not be so good next year. They might have to do a little bit of scoreboard chasing. That makes me like Deshaun Watson. I'm starting to – maybe I will end up taking Deshaun Watson in late round.
I don't know if their defense
drafts.
gets worse than what it was this year because it was pretty bad.
I don't know how it gets a lot better. Seattle, they're out. Russell Wilson was awesome as a quarterback for most of this year. As a fantasy quarterback, he left a lot to be desired.
He still was top 5, though.
He was. I wish he was a little more consistent because his big games were big and his bad games were
That's his whole career, though.
Kind of crappy. Yeah, I feel like we've seen a little bit more consistency from him in the past. I can't say statistically when it happened.
That's his whole career. He gives you a 40 game, and then he gives you 10, and then he gives you 25, and then he gives you 15.
All right, so what is it going to take for him to be a consistent fantasy quarterback?
Schottenheimer leaving probably, and then realizing that running on first and second down for the first 3 quarters until you're in a tie ball game or you're chasing points, and then making Russell Wilson be Superman. I mean, it's stupid. It's totally stupid at this point, but this is what they are. I mean, it's worked for them, so kudos to them. But, you have, I'll say 3 very good parts. Tyler Lockett had a breakout season like we thought, 1,000 yards for the first time. Targets went up. He was successful. DK Metcalf, great rookie receiver. Hopefully will improve in his second year. And I think the combination of their tight ends, whether it was Disley or Hollister, good third piece. They tried to get another option with Josh Gordon. It failed. We'll see what they do, maybe to add another receiving option there. And hopefully Chris Carson's healthy, but the combo of Carson Penny, if that's not right, and they've tried over the last couple of years to get a receiving back and CJ Prosise, maybe they add another player there, or maybe it's Travis Homer who did some nice things at the end of the season in that role. But this is what they are. It's just a matter of they need to fix their defense. That's the biggest flaw for the Seahawks.
It's like Houston, yeah.
And so if this continues to be their defense, then maybe that helps Russell Wilson. But he was also 3 and 4 were the same quarterbacks across the board for us. So it was Jackson, Mahomes, Watson 3, and Wilson was 4.
It's almost like you don't know who else to put it for, so you just go ahead and throw Russell Wilson.
It's Breeze. Who knows? Rodgers has fallen off. Brady's fallen off. I don't think anybody's ready to put, as we saw last year. The next hot flavor of the month, which was Baker Mayfield, ahead of Russell Wilson, which would be Kyler Murray. My guess is going to be everybody's favorite breakout candidate. So I don't think anybody's taking Kyler over Russell. So we
could get to that point, though. It's just going to take a lot from Arizona for us to get
It would
there.
probably be a mistake, and I'm guilty of, saying Baker was going to have a breakout season. So, and ADP last year, Russell Wilson was just inside the top 10. He was the 9th quarterback off the board. Mm-hmm. Again, mistake. So I think we just come to expect Russell Wilson to put up great numbers. Doesn't always mean it's going to happen week in, week out, but you just have to understand who he is.
Well, year over year, he is a great consistent quarterback in terms of total production, but the week-to-week stuff this year is really
right.
frustrating.
You got to eat it. You got to just deal with it.
And now you're facing a division that, probably going to be some shootouts with the Rams. We've seen that from those 2 teams when they meet. You're probably going to be chasing points against the 49ers or in a game where he's going to have to be Superman again. And then if Arizona's offense takes the next step, then that could be a game where, we're seeing some more shootouts where they've just sort of trampled the division during most of Russell Wilson's tenure. He hasn't had to do very much. The Arizona game this year was a big example of that. We thought, okay, here's Arizona. They're just giving up points after points after points. It was the first meeting, and he was the first one not to go over 20 fantasy points against the Cardinals because they just ran all over them. So, this is a team that's very much in flux with their run game and their defense, as we saw at the end of the year.
But not their quarterback. He was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy in 2017. He was number 8 in 2018. He was 4th in consistency in 2018. 11 of 16 games with 20-plus fantasy points. Just didn't have a lot. And this is 2018 I'm talking about. He only had 3 games with 30-plus. So he was good that year on a per-game basis. Only had a couple of duds here and there, but he didn't reach those huge highs. I don't think he was ever the number, or once. No, not at all. 2018 was he the number 1 quarterback. And in 2019, I think he was one time. He had the best game of any quarterback in terms of fantasy. So I get him as a top 4 fantasy quarterback. Who are you taking first, Lockett or Metcalf?
Lockett for me.
I kind of like what DK Metcalf can bring.
Metcalf finished better than Lockett. Lockett was better over the course of the season. It's just where's the ceiling lie for Metcalf? Because I think this is the ceiling for Lockett. Now, he did struggle with a couple of injuries, and who knows how long it took him to get back to full strength following the hospital stay in San Francisco and then the flu. That little stretch really, I think, put a damper on what his season was. I want to see what else they do. if they keep Lockett in the slot, because he stepped up for Doug Baldwin, you see what the numbers are. First time over 100 targets. The receptions were great. His yards per catch came down, but that's to be expected when he's getting more targets. And he was just, very, very good over the course of the year. But he's Russell Wilson at the receiver spot. There's going to be big games. There's going to be bad games. There's going to be a lot of inconsistent performances. I think Metcalf can maybe be a little bit better, but I think Lockett's certainly safer. So it's a matter of, I think, what your preference is. Are you taking the receiver with the pacifier, or are you taking the one that's been proven?
What do you think, Dave?
Well, I'm checking to see. Lockett finished as the 12th wide receiver, in PPR, 231 fantasy points. He had a 32-point game, and he had a 40-point game. So those really helped push him up. Sure.
But he also had the 3 duds when he had the flu and when he wasn't healthy.
He had a pretty bad stretch with the leg flu deals that he had. And he had 2 good games to round out the year. Week 15, 26 points. Week 17, which no one really used him for unless you played into Week 17. He had 17 points that week. I think that he can be what he was at the beginning of the season. But I think DK Metcalf is going to be just such a problem because he's got the same type of speed that Tyler Lockett has. He's not as good as a route runner, but he can make improvements in his second season, and I think he's got a chance to be certainly more dominant in the red zone. Remember, what did he start the year with? Was it 9 end zone targets or red zone targets, and he didn't even catch any of them? And then then it was the Atlanta game. He had 2 touchdowns. So it took him a while to really get going this year. I would expect him to improve in his second year. And if this offense does end up throwing a little bit more, he can end up with more touchdowns than Tyler Lockett and maybe as many targets, catches, and yards.
Well,
maybe
it wasn't far off. I mean, it was 11 targets difference. The only thing was the 82 catches for 58. He was 100 yards apart essentially and 1 touchdown. So I also, think if Will Dissly's healthy, the numbers were certainly different for Metcalf when Dissly was on the field versus when Dissly was off the field.
So Dissly is probably going to be our second favorite tight end among the teams that we're talking about here. Baltimore, Minnesota, Houston, Seattle.
If he's healthy. I mean, it's a tough injury to come back from.
Is he somebody that you're going to target late on draft day, especially if the schedule is nice for Seattle to begin the season?
All depends on health. He's coming back from an Achilles tear. This is now 2 injuries, back-to-back years where he hasn't been able to finish the season. He was great. He was absolutely great. And, I think Hollister had some great moments too. He just wasn't as explosive. But I think if you get to the point in your fantasy draft where people are taking 2 tight ends and you didn't take 1, this is a great fallback option. I don't care what the schedule is, but maybe they open in Arizona. That'd be nice.
Amazing.
But, there's a lot to like about what Russell Wilson has done with the tight end in his career. Jimmy Graham for 1 season and, Dissly for parts of 2 others the last 2 years.
Speaking of injuries, there's Chris Carson. Can he be a top 12 fantasy running back?
No, nor should he be.
I don't see it.
I'm not saying drafted as one because I agree with you on that. He's not going to get drafted as a top 12 running back, and I almost wonder if he would if he hadn't have gotten hurt. Could he have ended up being a second-round pick and not PPR?
No, he wouldn't be a second-round pick. He's a third.
Would he have been if he didn't get hurt?
I think
because now he's definitely not.
If Penny didn't get the chance to emerge late in the season, yes, sure. But when Penny was on the field for those majority of snaps, a lot of touches, Carson had the one really good game, but also a really bad game. So it's scary with Penny in the mix and coming off the injury. I don't think he should be drafted.
But they're both
early.
coming off injuries, so Penny may not be ready to go at the start of the season either. Carson's expected to be fine, but you have to wonder, with this is my fear with Henry too. It's these physical running backs. They're able to do it over a short span. It's just they don't do it over a long span. And this is, kind of why people get scared about paying running backs because of what the contact that they've taken. So 2 of 3 years now for Carson, he hasn't been able to finish the season. The ankle injury in his rookie year and now this hip injury. And so for a guy that runs to contact, what's the concern? This is the concern, And so do the Seahawks add somebody else now to pair with Penny and Carson, knowing that they may not be 100% as a duo for training camp? Is it Homer? Is it bringing back Marshawn Lynch just as a Band-Aid, just in case they need him to be this guy again? But you see what this offense is. I mean, 9 touchdowns for Carson on the ground, or 9 total touchdowns, excuse me. Marshawn Lynch scored 4 touchdowns in 3 games, so they used their backs outside of the one time at the goal line. So, he's very good. It's just a matter of
can he hold up?
Yeah, and what's the
And can he fend off Rashad Penny?
or
It's a lot of
Or
questions.
someone else.
Yeah.
It's a lot of questions for a guy who went in early round 3 in our non-PPR mock. And I love the talent and I love the fit. Don't love the offensive line. I think that
it really hasn't
next
mattered
year
though for
ago.
him though.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I almost wonder if he'd obviously be one of those guys that you'd prefer to get a little bit later on. You could conceivably draft him and Penny, and we're almost right back where we were a year ago, where we were drafting both of those guys, if you were so inclined, to get Carson with the top 30 pick, and then Penny went 76th overall in our non-PPR mock.
Yeah, but that's Will Brinson's got an infatuation with Rashad Penny. He had it last year too.
Yeah.
And
it's an ACL for Penny, so who knows how soon.
but
he's
apparently it was
gonna
bad
end up
though. So that's the key. You feel like Seattle. I don't know if it's a Schneider thing or if it's a Carroll thing or it's this is the guy we drafted. We have to justify the first round pick from a couple of years ago, so we're going to try and make this work.
Yeah,
or
it's
is
not
it
gonna
just
work.
Carson? Well, I mean, look, Penny was if he hadn't gotten hurt, who knows what this would have been for him to finish. And if it had played out where he was healthy and Carson suffered the hip injury. And Penny scoring 4 touchdowns in 3 games like Marshawn Lynch did. We're talking about Penny probably as the better of the Seattle running backs coming into 2020.
Let's do a little rapid fire as we move away from playoff teams and talk about the breaking news going on with a non-playoff team. The Jaguars have parted ways with John DeFilippo.
That stinks.
So this guy can't hold a job for a year. He left Minnesota early. Now he's leaving Jacksonville early. Doug Marrone's sticking around. DeFilippo is not. What do you think this means for the future of the Jacksonville offense? Are they going to try and be a little bit more conservative now? That's what I'm thinking. And I don't know if he was necessarily a reason why the Jaguars were so bad this year. I just think the injury to Nick Foles got them off to kind of a rocky start. Minshew got them going in a different direction, but the defense wasn't really as good
Especially
as we
the run
thought it would
defense
be.
was awful.
Yeah, they were terrible. So I don't understand why he's taking the fall for this, but is this a step toward Jacksonville saying, okay, we want to be a little more
somebody out there
conservative?
that they like. That's probably you're starting to see all the coaching spots are filled now. So there's either somebody, maybe it's Scangarello, that they want to make a move like that. Somebody who's just recently fired, or there's somebody that they like in the college ranks that they want to bring in, or there's somebody on their staff.
Could it be Todd Monken?
Could be Todd Monken.
That would be fun.
That's
of course. Then they're keeping their pedal to the metal on offense then, because Filippo and Monken.
This is something to watch because DeFilippo was fantastic for Fournette in terms of his reception. Over 70 catches. This was something that we talked about that he likes to throw to his backs. He did. Fournette was awesome. I don't think it's going to really change your view of the receivers because I think they've kind of proven what they are. DJ Chark's the rising star, and then you see Westbrook has still probably the second highest ceiling of that group, and then we'll see what they do in terms of filling that 3rd and 4th spot in their offense. But this is all eyes on Fournette right now. And who's going to be the quarterback? Whether it's Foles or it's Minshew, but if they hire somebody that is more conservative, that's not going to throw to their backs as much, then it's going to be bad for Fournette to still be in that top 10 conversation. He's still going to be a round 2 pick, I think at the latest, maybe early round 3. But DeFilippo was good for Fournette.
We'll attack that offense more when they do have a new offensive coordinator and what it could mean for Fournette. But hopefully they keep Fournette involved in the passing game. That would be sensational for his fantasy value. Rapid fire, more thoughts from the divisional games. These are questions from Adam Azer. Does Derrick Henry have to be a first-round pick in any format at this point?
Yes.
I think so.
What would be the concern in what's the case against him?
It's the touchdown regression. That's the only thing. You think the touchdowns will go down, and he's not using the pass game, but he is such a beast. He's getting the 15-plus touches guaranteed, and there's no reason to me that his touchdowns will go below 10 next year. I understand regression. He's going to go closer to the mean, but the guy is going to score every time they're within the 3-yard line, so I don't see why Henry's not a first-round pick.
Did Tevin Coleman's game make you want to avoid drafting a 49ers running back in 2020?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Avoid early.
What round would you take Tevin Coleman in?
10.
9 or 10. I'd rather draft Mostert at this point.
He went with the first pick in round 9 in our non-PPR mock. I think that's right around the time to take him, just to add running back depth, because I think he'll be part of that run game in San Francisco.
It's funny because before the game, I was with 2 49ers fans, and they were talking about, the window for the 49ers, if they win this year, what the success can be, and if they don't make it, what's the the likelihood of them still being at this level. And, one of the things they said was, two knowledgeable guys, which I never really talked football with them, but in any event, the first thing they said was, well, Coleman will be a cap casualty. And I thought about it, I was like, I guess, when you look at it, they have all these guys under contract. McKinnon, who apparently was a great mentor to the team in facing Minnesota, Coleman, Mostert, and Breida. And so it makes sense for them to part with one. And he, prior to this game, was the one that looked like the odd man out. But, Mostert really hasn't taken more than 12 to 15 touches. And so that makes you a little bit concerning for a guy who's an undrafted free agent that they don't have a lot invested in, whereas Coleman is the guy that they clearly invested in this offseason. And so what their offseason plans, I think, will determine. If Coleman is, one of three with Mostert and maybe
Do we think McKinnon? Because he has $4 million dead money. I don't think they're going to get rid of him.
They might. I don't know how good he is at this point, and certainly reliability,
but
availability.
In a limited role, he could probably still give something, And as we've seen, Breida has been really phased out. He played a little bit because it was a blowout, but it's been sort of Coleman and Mostert as just being the two guys there. But it's going to be something I think that we have to keep an eye on.
Your fan friends are right about him. He's a $4.9 million cap savings for the 49ers if they cut him, and it's the last year of the deal. No dead money. So it's kind of a good situation. Rapid fire email questions and answers from Aaron. Hello, Probst, Chen, and Kyohan. Keep 3 for as long as you want. Lamar Jackson, Chris Carson, Josh Jacobs, Devonta Adams, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, Travis Kelce. So right when you thought it was going to be pretty easy with Jackson, Jacobs, and Adams, he adds in Allen, Lockett, Kelce. Which 3 are you keeping?
Kelce, Adams, and Jackson.
Kelce, Adams, Jacobs for me.
I have to hold on to Kelce and Jacobs. And I think Devonta Adams is going to get drafted before Lamar Jackson. I hate letting Lamar Jackson go, but I'd rather have those pieces in place.
Whenever you have longevity like this, I would take the safer positions.
Devin from a town an hour east of Pittsburgh with consistently good college basketball and football programs. Dear Adam, and Adam. Great stuff on Dynasty last week. Are you able to provide more detail on how to actually do the drafting to get started, i.e. the draft order for veteran players, how that relates to the order for rookie drafts? Do you do 2 separate drafts with reverse order? If you're starting a Dynasty league, and we are going to keep talking about Dynasty stuff throughout the offseason, do you do a separate draft now? Do you do it right after the real NFL draft? Do you incorporate rookies into your first ever Dynasty league draft?
The 2 dynasty leagues that I play in, both were done differently. The first one was just the one that the draft that we did here, not the first one, but the draft we did here in our office. We did a veteran draft and then a rookie draft. And the way that we did it, if you want to do it the same way, was we just reversed the order of the veteran draft. So if it was Ben, me, Dave, then the rookie draft went Dave, me, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
So it just was background. I told the story when we talked about this the last time that it worked out really well for me because I picked 13th of 14 in the veteran draft, and I picked 2nd in the rookie draft, and it was McCaffrey's rookie year, and the person picking first took Fournette. I took McCaffrey, and I've been thrilled about it ever since. The other dynasty league that I take part in, we started after the NFL draft, and so that one was just everybody in the mix.
Depends on how many drafts you really want to do, right?
Yeah, I think, and then we actually did the one in the office. We did 3 drafts because then we did a supplemental draft after with all the players that were left.
Because we did a draft.
This was also
the veteran draft was before the NFL draft.
Veteran draft was after the season.
That. Right.
Veteran draft was after the season.
But before the NFL draft.
Before the NFL draft. The rookie draft was after the NFL draft.
And then the supplemental was during the preseason.
Right. Because that one, again, we also do it with IDPs, and so it made it a little bit easier to sort of do it that way.
From Albert, tough choice for keepers here. We have a $200 budget, need to keep 4. Kamara at $16, Kittle at $12, Singletary at $8, Metcalf at $8, Miles Sanders at $25, and you have to decide by the Super Bowl.
I'm not keeping Sanders.
No way.
Way too much.
Do you keep 4?
Yeah.
Keep 4, keep the rest.
Kamara, Kittle, Singletary, Metcalf.
Absolutely.
Easy. Last one, Jeff in South Jersey. Hey, Allen, Shirley, Paul, and Denny.
You have to keep 4, because if you don't have to keep 4, I might throw back Metcalf. That's a little pricey for him.
I don't mind keeping him for 8.
For a $200 budget, it's not
terrible.
terrible.
$200, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Right, if it was a $100 budget, I would have some questions about it too, so I get that. I can keep 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end. DK Metcalf for a 9th, Debo for a 14th, James Conner for a 13th, Ronald Jones for a 13th, Zach Ertz for a 5th, Dallas Goedert for a 14th, or 12th or 13th, depending on what other keepers you keep. So keep 1 wide receiver. DK for a 9, Debo for a 14. I'm keeping Debo.
Debo.
Yeah.
James Conner for a 13th. Rojo for a 13th. Which one are you going to keep?
I mean, Connor.
Connor, come on.
Connor it is. Zach Ertz for a 5th over Goddard. It's pretty obvious.
For
right?
sure.
A lot of coaching changes going on around the NFL. We're going to talk about that throughout the rest of the week. And, of course, toward the end of the week, a lot of DFS discussion to get you ready for the conference championship games. It's an exciting time to be a football fan. Exciting time to play a little fantasy and DFS. Were you successful in your DFS exploits this weekend?
Yep.
Tannehill worked out.
I got myself a big fat 0. I won absolutely nothing. My DFS picks were terrible. For Ben Schrager, for Jamie Eisenberg, I'm Dave Richard. Thanks for coming out.